Good morning, and welcome to Deep Waves Transformation, where we dive into the realms of mental health, trauma recovery, narcissistic abuse recovery, toxic love relationships, and more. I am your host, Tasha Day, and I am here to guide you through this journey of awareness and healing. Today we have with us Ryan Crittenden from Colorado Springs, Colorado. He has a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology from Grand Canyon University and is a certified strength coach and the owner and founder of XL Coaching and Development. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you, Ryan?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. I am glad to be here with you today.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate your time. So, what I want to do with you is dive deep into the mindset and how powerful it is. But before we do that, would you mind sharing a journey story of your own with us?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a little bit about how I got here. We're going to go, I'll try to skip some, minor details. But I was in the Army 2010 to 2014. And as I was transitioning out, I had some really great experience with leaders. I had some really poor experiences with leadership, as you would with any kind of career. But what I realized is those really good times, the leaders made all the difference. And so I knew that I wanted to become a better leader. And so I got out, started exploring options on how to grow my leadership abilities, and so that was a few-year journey after that, and I got into coaching in 2016, and then I landed what I thought was my dream job, and I had leadership responsibility. It was like building something from the ground up, a lot of entrepreneurial um, freedom in this role. But then what I didn't realize is I kind of felt like I was almost being groomed when I look back to it. My boss in this role really kind of set it up that he wanted me to be hip. And when I kind of started to kick back being like, hey, I'm me at this, like, this doesn't feel comfortable doing things like you. And by all means, like what he did was successful for him. But he'd been in the industry for 40 years. And so he was, well established, had his own groove. And there were certain things that he had, like, I felt like he was stuck back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not me. One, I'm in grad school. Uh, I kind of felt like I was really doing a lot for free. Like they were paying me. It just didn't have the budget. I felt like it was going to grow and I wanted to be a part of that. And then it just turned into every meeting I had was something with him on like the performance review kind of meetings
Mm,
where everything I was doing was wrong. I was doing it the wrong way. There were things that I needed to do to fix me. And there was a lot of projecting himself on me in regards to this is the way you're successful. And then it came with more responsibilities, same amount of pay. And then like things being like other people in the organization were like, why is Ryan doing this? Well, he's doing that because he's already going to be here. So he might as well be in charge of this too. And there was, yeah, just a lot of taking advantage of my willingness to be in this role because I just believed in the mission and what was going on. And then it just, yeah, then it turned into this breaking point where I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I was like, hated going to work. He would call me and I'd I'd ignore the phone call. And I'm like,
yeah.
you shouldn't feel that way with anybody. And then when I left, I eventually heard of all the lies of, Ryan left because he didn't want to do the work. And the crazy thing is that nobody like said, hey, that's not the Ryan we know. Like
Right.
Ryan was working his tail off and you burn him out. And then as I started to reflect back, it was just this, you almost like got bought into that, the leader of this organization was the victim in me being there. And he turned it into like, how could Ryan come here and like treat us all this way? And like, and he was lazy and just took advantage of everything. He was just like,
We call that in the personality disorder world, we call that a smear campaign.
totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, but what I didn't know, and I would have asked different questions now, obviously in hindsight, is I was about the fifth, not the fifth, there's been like five since me, but at the time I was probably the third staff member to go through that. And it happened about every 9 to 12 months. And I was there 11 months by the time I was like, I'm done. And it was interesting. So another staff member would leave, same different kind of lies. And it was this repeated thing. And I only kind of hear about it just from passing now. They're like, oh, another guy left. I wish someone would say, we got to stop doing this to people.
Yeah.
And it really got, when I first left, I really got into my own head. So this would have been like spring of 2017, where I was like, just burnout. Everything I was doing, everything was going so great, but I was like, honestly, there's something wrong with me. Where you start thinking like, I mean, he's in the industry 40 years. I, was a new guy. So maybe,
So he manipulated you that bad into thinking that you were the problem.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And, yeah. And so I started being like, man, maybe I was the problem. And it honestly took multiple years to unweave that.
Mm-hmm.
Because also then what I didn't know also is I was kind of dealing with that same type of behavior in my personal life from,
Oh,
and that actually is a more recent discovery, being like, oh man, how have I, you just get kind of blinded by people that have these narcissistic behaviors where everything looks great, sounds great. And then all of a sudden it's like, second, why? This doesn't make any sense. How am I at fault for everything? Yeah.
yeah. So something inside of you said that I know I'm not the crazy person. Like, I
Yeah.
really do. Deep down inside, you know you're not. But you keep like gaslighting yourself. You're like, but wait, am I? But no, I'm not. Like, you keep having this internal conflict with yourself thinking you are,
Yeah.
but you
And
know you're not deep down inside. You know you're not.
yeah. And, so, so I was in Montana, back in Montana, where I'm originally from. And when I left that role, I was like, I'm, I really just need to do a hard reset. So I came back to Colorado, where I was in the Army, got reconnected with some friends who were starting a coaching company, and it was based on strengths. And I remember talking, I was like, hey, I'm actually, a certified coach. I implemented coaching competencies and stuff like that into my leadership role, and we should talk. And they were like, yeah, that sounds great. And I went through their coaching program, which I now call Strengths Foundations, which I, encourage all of my clients to go through. And when I went through it, one, I really started to identify who I was. And so it's about, 3 to 5 sessions. And I went through 5 sessions, but the third session, I literally was like, I'm awesome.
Yes, I love that.
I was like, this is cool. Like, I have a lot to add. Um,
Yeah.
and then when we went through the quick session of, okay, this is who you're not, I was like, oh my gosh, like thinking about this last role, I definitely got hired for who I was, but my leader wanted me to be who I was not, which is probably who he probably has those other strengths in a good productive context, which is great because we actually, if there was that freedom, that trust, the no manipulation, probably would have been a great team. But unfortunately, that's just the way things are in that organization.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it kind of came into this like, man, I I am awesome, and I like and love who I am. And I'm really at peace now with who I'm not. And don't get me wrong, it was still quite a journey kind of recovering from working with someone who was just a huge narcissist, to recover, because there's just so much angst and anxiety that go into that. And one of the things that kind of started to help was realizing that when you're dealing with a narcissist, you're probably not their first person that they've taken advantage of and done these things to. And you're not going to be their last. And it's all unfortunate, every part of it. And then the third part, kind of like what we were talking about before, all these feelings that someone has when they deal with a narcissist, they're normal. And everybody has them, and you're not alone. And so through this journey of like me understanding who I am and kind of recovering really has helped how I want to engage with folks, how I want to lead, how I want to work, coach. And then also then I got married 5 years ago and I have twin boys. And I really want to be intentional in those relationships, that I'm not, that hopefully I would never treat them the way that I was treated in that context.
Sure.
Now, here's a great thing to know, that you're actually not a narcissist. And I've learned, and I got to confirm, I thought about it when I was like in school working on my doctorate and stuff, but I did actually go to therapy for a little bit. Once I was finally willing to got to a spot where I was like, yeah, I can engage in my past now. And it was super helpful. But we talked about if you ask the question, am I a narcissist? And you're genuinely considerate, the fact that you're even asking means you're probably not a narcissist.
Yeah.
Narcissists don't care. They're not the problem. They're not the fault. They're not at fault for anything. But all that to say is, when you go through that experience and you start to heal, it really sets you up for, how you want to engage with other folks.
What are some of the things that you did in order to heal?
Yeah. So some of it was therapy. That was a little bit more recent. So being around 7 years removed, I finally was like, okay, I have enough time and space between that experience and now. Let's go back. One of it was coaching, thinking forward, goal oriented. So some of it was working with a coach who understood me and thinking forward and working on goals. Some of it was a lot of just internal reflection. Some of it was having very few friends that I trusted with this content, and that understood the context of this leadership role, that I could honestly just kind of vent with. But those were very few. And now you got to understand the difference between what a friend will offer, what a coach will offer, and what a therapist will offer. When I just needed to just talk and just kind of even just think through scenarios, they were just helpful and listened. They didn't try to fix me. They didn't try to push me forward. They were right where I was.
I love that. Creating that safe space for you, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And
because dealing with narcissists, you're not offered that safe space at all to be you comfortably, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally. You're just not safe with these people at all.
Yep. Absolutely.
So, and once you're away from that situation and away from that person, you're like, oh my God, I can see clearly now, right?
Yeah. It's amazing how just removing yourself from that situation. I remember I felt so much better as I drove away.
See, that's the other thing I heard too from, I believe it was Dr. Romani that said, if you feel better after you leave the narcissist, that should say a lot within the first 30 seconds. How does your body feel? Is it heavy? Is it tense? Is it constricted? Or are you relaxed and you can breathe? It's like, oh shit, didn't even think about that.
Right.
Yeah, I feel so much better when I'm away from this person. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Which also helps us in turn know that we're not the problem, because really that's our signal. You get in the car, you drive away from this person and you're calmer. That says everything. There's your answer right there. You are not the problem.
Yeah.
But you're not alone either. So
yeah, and it's really interesting. to see that dynamic. Even now, like looking back, it's almost like it was a different Ryan.
Yes.
Having gone through that to now where I've had some other realizations of narcissism where it still hurts and it's still just like, man, like I wish it wasn't this way, but I understand you because you are not the first narcissist I've come across.
Yeah.
So then you can better not like necessarily protect yourself, but there is kind of a shielding, but you can go forward differently.
Well, the
Um,
more you know, the more you grow. And the more you grow,
yep.
it kind of distances yourself. This is why a lot of successful, educated people are lonely today, because
Mhm.
we've learned to distance ourselves from things that have hurt us, which ultimately leaves us alone at the end of the day.
Yep.
The
Yeah.
1% club, right?
So,
How big of an impact has mentorship played in your recovery from all of this?
yeah, that's a great question. So that initial coach that I had, um, that coached me through strengths and helped
Where
me.
did you find this person?
So actually when I was in the army, he was a friend's dad.
Okay.
And so when I was college age when I was in the army, and they had a college group, and a lot of times when we would just hang out, it was at their house. So naturally, when I moved back to Colorado, it was like, oh yeah, hey, I'll go back there because that's what I'm used to.
Yeah.
And he had really had his own journey too. And the funny thing is, maybe a little younger than that boss that I had that drove me. Yeah, it really wounded my heart. He's a little bit younger, but he's really wise and just a really great guy. So when we went through strengths, we were actually business partners. And for a little bit, I joined that coaching company as a partner. I'm not a partner anymore. I'm still part of it though. And yeah, so he's really been a friend and a mentor since then, the last 7 or so years. And so it's interesting how like the exact opposite came into my life.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah.
And why do you think that is? Do you think it has anything to do with mindset strength?
Yeah, so there could be a number of things, on why that had, but yeah, when you have this, when you see the person with the mindset that you want, you need to hang out with those folks. And he's really into making sure relationships are number one. People are able to connect, problems are minor. And there's, man, number of stories where I could share about him where I'm like, I remember initially, like when we were in business together, be like, oh, this could be a problem. And I know my past boss probably would have, blown up this small issue. And Dave is his name. And Dave would just be like, oh, yes, that's not a problem. You're like, whatever, we'll get it figured out. Like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm weirded out because I kind of think this might be a problem. And
Yeah.
he just, no, it's not. Like, and it was always like administrative, like we were, bootstrapping a startup. So it's like, we don't have enough money,
Yeah.
right now. And he's like, oh, yeah, that's fine. Like, pay me last. Like,
Okay.
okay. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was just really, it's always really refreshing. Even I talked to him yesterday and I'm just like, I'm so glad you're in my life.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Oh my gosh, I love those people. Hold them
Hmm.
close.
That's right.
The ones that don't judge, don't criticize, hold that safe space for you and make you feel loved at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And if they're
Yeah. And
not,
like totally. And the cool thing is like shares things too personally about what he's working through and struggling with. And he really has that standard of, man, people are more important than any problem. Where when I was in that leadership role, it was like I was the problem.
yeah,
And it's like it's a much better feeling.
good. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. I have a question about getting into conflicts with these people. How do you create an inarguable argument?
And argue with a narcissist.
Yeah, because I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of it has to do with setting boundaries. So if they approach you in like a hostile type of way, how do you create that inarguable argument?
Yeah, my first thought is I just don't want to argue with a narcissist because you're never going to win. They're going to somehow in their mind be able to twist and flip things and like pin it back on you, look on something that you might have said that could be taken a different way, and they'll take it the different way and try to kind of slam it in your face. So I'd say really try not to argue even with a narcissist. However, if someone does approach you like that, you can say, "Hey, we need to schedule a time because this is not the time or place to talk when we're feeling this way."
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's the first thing. Yeah, I wouldn't even argue with them because
Yeah,
they're gonna.
don't even waste your time. Don't waste
Yeah,
your breath.
even if you can quote unquote win, it's really not a win because then
It's
it goes.
really not, because at the end of the day, you feel like you were gaslit the whole time and
Yeah,
manipulated into not winning. It's just super weird. Super weird.
so it's yeah, I'd encourage just to set those boundaries up. Hey, let's talk a different time. Let's take a few deep breaths and go from there. But yeah, if they're coming at you, I wouldn't even try to argue. Yeah.
Absolutely. So when you are out of this relationship, well, if you can manage to escape, I should say, because I escaped, it felt like I was breaking out of prison. That's how it felt.
Mm,
How would someone like myself, I mean, I can speak on my behalf on my story, but how would someone who just got out of a situation like that start to recover their brain?
yeah. So the first thing that worked for me was finding you can call it your tribe, your
Yes,
community,
your
uh,
community.
your group of friends, like people you can trust that you want to be with. So kind of like I said, when you introduced me and I said, I'm glad to be here with you. If you can say that with the people you're with, being like, I'm glad to be here with you and actually mean it and like
Yeah.
look someone in the eye and say, Tasha, I am glad to be here with you, then you're in the right spot.
Yeah.
If you're like, I I don't know if I am. Maybe you haven't found it or still just might need some time. So the first thing is, um, find your tribe, your community, your group, your friends, whatever you want to call it. The second thing, for me then was I engaged with a coach, uh, who I, still see now. And it's
Yeah.
kind of more of a mentor friend. And then we coach each other too at different times and aspects, but it really is more of a mentor friend
Yeah.
relationship now. But work with a coach that you can connect. Now, remember, a coach is going to help you go forward, goal setting. And that's the way that I went. And um, now I really loved that kind of industry I was in. I'm not in it anymore. I don't care to be.
Hmm.
But what I do now is there's a lot of similar things, which makes me excited, but it's not the same. So find like, I don't know, another productive place to be to where you're producing and contributing positively. If that's like a work related thing. Eventually, I got to a point where I felt comfortable with engaging with a therapist about it. And so that's also another really good thing. So find a therapist you connect with, and they're trained, skilled on going backwards. And it was actually really helpful for a lot of different areas of my life. Because as I look back, I started to see different kind of events in my life, but it all stemmed from, narcissistic abuse. And it was my responses, not necessarily to other narcissists or anything, but it's because I hadn't healed fully. So one, do know that it takes some time, but engage. I think for me, those are some of the best ways to engage. And it's a process, and that's okay.
It really is definitely a long process. And the power of affirmation is extremely important too, as well, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and I actually, that was one of the things we had talked about in therapy one time. And I was just like, I remember just saying to me like, I don't know, like, why do I feel like I need affirmation all the time? And it was funny, and she was like, well, it's because we're actually like deprived of affirmation. And it's not the whole like I need people to always congratulate me, but it's like I just went through, I'd gone through a really important season that I was going and really loving what I was doing. And it was just everything turned into a beat down. And so it really started to where I had to learn how to self-affirm
Yes.
first. And I had to kind of remember my strengths too, being like, oh yeah, like I said, I'm awesome. Sometimes I need to just tell myself that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so sometimes it just starts with, self-affirming, being like, yeah, these are the things right with me. And these other things are just not me, and that's okay.
So with your degree in psychology, what strengths have you gained as far as your education and your experience? What strengths have you come out with in the end of all of that put together?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So yeah, so I have a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology, so IO Psych, and it's like workplace behavior. So a lot of coaching consulting goes into that. That was what was interesting to me.
Because you were experiencing the narcissism in the workplace.
Well, so yeah, so workplace has always been interesting, but I remember being like, okay, I want to go and get a doctorate. What do I want to get my doctorate?
Yeah.
Someone asked me, well, what do you love? And I was like, I love coaching. And they're like, well, get a doctorate in coaching. And this was about the best you could come up with. So yeah, I think, developing like new strengths, I'm not sure about that, other than they use a lot of my strengths to get through it. Like my belief in my responsibility, being like, this is something I believe in and I've committed to it and taken ownership. So some days when it's like, I don't want to do this anymore. Because getting a doctorate degree makes you feel a lot of feelings
Yes.
as well. So some of it is like, this is just, I believe that this is what I need to do. And I'm going to take ownership of doing that. So those were ones that I really used, along with like my maximizer talent, making things good, taking things that are good, turning it into great. Because there's a lot of, when you get into the dissertation phase, there's a lot of back and forth with like your committee chair, you have a content expert, you have a methodologist, and they all have their own input. Then there's you, and you got to consider their input, and then you got to do more research on what their input meant, because especially methodology, I'm not great at that. So it's just taking that, a lot of like, okay, I need to improve as a person to really accomplish this goal, and taking that ownership.
I love that, Ryan. Yeah, that's awesome. When you're having those really like super good days, like, because I know that dealing with trauma and stuff, we always have our setbacks, right? But the comeback is always greater than the setback. But when you do have those days and then you go about and you have an awesome day, how do you celebrate those wins?
Yeah, fortunately, right now I celebrate bad and good days the same.
I love that.
By
How would we celebrate a bad day?
Yeah, sometimes I'll stop working early, and fortunately, I work from home, and I'm able to have little bit more control of my schedule, more than I ever have. But then I go just spend the rest of the night like hanging out with my boys and my wife, and then like that's it.
I love it.
And it's a good, no matter how like I feel like the when you especially when you have like toddlers, and maybe the toddler boys in particular, like they always just see the great things in you.
Always.
And then it kind of reminds me, like, when you're in those tough moments, when I started back into like entrepreneurship, one of the quotes I heard was, in those bad times, talk to yourself like a toddler.
It's
Because
very true.
I was like, man, and I still even think about that, where, like, talk to yourself like a toddler, because like, if they're, if they mess up, like, you're not going to yell at them or scream at them. You're just, hey, let's get back up. Let's try that again. And so it's that a reassuring, be like, I got to talk to myself as a toddler. Be like, yeah, when I mess up, it's not because I'm a problem. It's because people mess up, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my boys right now are learning to walk up the stairs. And one of them in particular likes to grab the spindles to help him pull himself up. He always does really great when he's reaching forward and pulling, but sometimes, and this is why I walk behind him, he'll reach back for some reason and maybe try to like push himself forward. And that's what I kind of remember, like I liken that to coaching, working, like, hey, we're reaching forward and pulling ourselves instead of reaching back and trying to push ourselves.
Yeah. I love it. How would you define happiness, Ryan, in your eyes?
Um, yeah, happiness, I think there's maybe a good difference between happiness and like joy, but maybe kind of a little bit one and the same. Like when you're able just to sit back and you think about something, like I think about my boys walking up the stairs or something like that, and you just smile, and then it kind of goes back to, can you say I'm glad to be here, and if you're like, yeah, I'm glad to be here, and then there's just that peace in your body, like that's kind of joy
Yeah, I agree.
and happiness, yeah.
Yeah. What have been some of the biggest risks that you've taken in starting your business venture?
Yeah, the biggest risks. So one of my boys, well, both boys, like when you have your twins, as you know, as a former NICU nurse and stuff, there's just developmentally, like they're gonna be, premature. They're probably gonna spend some time in the NICU, and so there's just a lot of therapies they can do, and which is great. And so my boys do a lot, but it's stuff that they can just will help set them up for future success. But one of the risks and what kept me in my other the last time I had a boss kept me in that role was because they had really good insurance. And so understanding that risk of I'm gonna have to get creative and figure out how we can be able to afford all these therapies. And fortunately, planning from when I was in the Army to now, like everything's kind of come full circle. But that was a big thing on our mind of one, we're going to give up an income, kind of a guaranteed income, and we're going to give up good insurance. And at a certain point, I was like, I need to do what I love. So I can say I'm glad to be here and I'm excited to wake up every morning. I don't like drudge going to work. That's a big thing too. Like if you just, if you're like, if you hate Monday morning and there's nothing you can do to stop hating Monday morning, there's some things maybe we need to work on, but you also may just be in a bad fit, and that's okay. But yeah, so I was like, I need to make this adjustment for my own life personally. So that was a big risk. But then also, yeah, how am I going to be able to make sure my boys are going to be okay?
Yeah.
Fortunately, everything has worked out. So,
Yay. I love that. Tell me a little bit more about XL coaching and how you help your client.
XL coaching and development. XL actually does stand for my boys, Xander and Lucas. So some folks think it's like extreme leadership coaching, which is one of the favorite ones I've heard, but that's not so I kind of let people say, whatever they
Yeah.
want. But yeah, so I work, with leaders, or people that are aspiring to be leaders. Um, in the workplace. I do work with folks kind of more on a not necessarily professional level, but they want to, have a strengths-based approach to living. So I do help in that capacity as well. But I help leaders level up their game, first understand their strengths, and then who they're not. That kind of goes hand in hand. We want to have a plan and understanding of who we're not in the workplace, but we want to be able to focus on our strengths and go forward, be more productive, accomplish goals, whatever that goal may be. And then also work in their teams, overcome obstacles, increase productivity, performance based on the team. But all my clients, I encourage to go through strengths foundations first. Then we go into more of what they want to develop and grow in. And sometimes that is found during the strengths foundations times where they're like, I need to grow in this area. All right, sweet. Like let's do that as we continue our coaching relationship. So it's one-on-one. It's not a fancy, buy this 30-day package or anything like that. It really is a deep dive into who we are, uh, and then kind of slogging through whatever's, keeping us from growing as a leader or keeping us away from a promotion or anything like that.
Yeah. What advice would you give to somebody that just needs to not feel the burnout?
Mm,
because we're so
yeah.
go, 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 go today. How do we not feel burnt out?
uh, and it is tough. So my advice is once you start feeling a drag, like as soon as you can, just take a break, even if it's an afternoon. Like remember, and I see this on LinkedIn all the time, and it's a great reminder that you are replaceable at work.
Oh, yeah,
Like
we're just numbers.
you're just numbers, even if you have a great boss, anything like that. But if you were to pass away, like 48 hours later, they're going to look for another person to fill your job's posted. But it's really with your family, you're replaceable. And that's really where it matters. And so slow down, like take care of yourself for yourself, but then also for your family. Your job's important, all that is great, but I'd really encourage you not to make it number one. And as soon as it's not number one, like you can focus on the things that really give you life and joy and fulfillment.
Yeah.
And in regards to burnout, um, when you're being filled, burnout is a lot less likely. It still can happen, but we want to set a healthy rhythm for our lives.
Absolutely. What advice would you give to the male community out there that is struggling with mental health? And maybe let's target the new generation today, the high schoolers and the college kids.
Yeah. Oh man. Maybe my advice might be kind of the same for everybody. Like I waited too long, and maybe that's not fair. Maybe it was end up being just right. But don't like feel bad about wanting to work on your mental health. Like to, take a mental health day, to take some time by yourself and like go for a drive and just decompress. And it's not bad to say you're working with a therapist or
Mhm.
working with a coach. Those are all really important. And it goes back to kind of what I said earlier. Like you are not replaceable in your family. And
Yes.
and it doesn't matter if you're the son or if you're the dad or you're a brother, like you are not replaceable. So the more that we can show up for ourselves and each other and be who we genuinely are, I think we'll see you know, for me, I have a much better life. But it did take some time, and it did take some unwinding those thoughts of like, I'm not the problem. And my relationships are a bit more important than the problem.
Yeah. True. As a man, were you taught to suppress emotion and not show it?
Maybe not directly, but there was definitely times being like, especially when I was in the army.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I had an injury that went undiagnosed for 3 years, and that's not an uncommon story. Fortunately, even though with a lot of pain and stuff, I lived through it, and it's better now after a couple surgeries. But you're not hurt. You just need to go through it. Like you just need to do this. And it's like, no, I'm actually hurt and I can't do that because I'm hurt. I need to get better before I can go do that. And so I think like they don't directly say like you can't show emotions, but sometimes it's really not welcome or understanding. But I think that goes back to when you have your friends or your tribe and your community, when you're able to say, hey, I am feeling terrible. Like I'm having a really bad day. And they're like, hey,
Mhm.
I'm here for you. Instead of, well, hey, that sucks.
Just deal with it. I don't know what to tell you, dude. Like the common answers. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's what I was just asking because just based on statistics, the male community just doesn't really speak up as loud as the female community does. And so, how
Mhm.
do we get males to engage more in the mental health community? Because it's amazing.
Yeah. I think the more we can, normalize it and just affirm it that it's okay. It's a normal thing, and it does take those times of, look at past generations where you know, we didn't have these resources, and you know, guys would just burn out and they weren't engaged in their family after work just simply because they just couldn't. We just didn't have the capacity to. And so now it's like, hey, let's normalize actually like taking care of ourselves and encourage books to be read and it's okay. So we definitely have a lot more capacity than past generations to be able to help folks in their mental health, and we just have to keep affirming that it's okay.
I agree. It is okay. And it's okay to not be okay too sometimes.
Mhm.
It's okay.
Yeah, I like to say it's
Learn to
okay
give
to,
yourself grace.
yeah, give yourself a lot of grace. I do like to say, like, it's okay to not be okay, but it's not okay to stay there.
Exactly.
Um,
Exactly.
and
It's
so,
called the rubber band effect. Like you can
yeah,
pull out as far as you can and you can snap, but like how long is it going to take you to kind of recover from that?
yeah. And, and feeling plateaued, I was talking to someone the other day about it too. They're like, no, it's not okay to plateau in like your life, when you're going up and then you hit a point and then you plateau. And I'm like, no, like plateauing is great, but let's be intentional about the plateauing. It's like, what are we doing in the plateauing time? Are we healing? Are we growing? Are we resting? Are we, in a business wise, are we thinking of another way forward? How are we reaching our customers and stuff like that? So there's things to do in the plateauing time, but it's not okay to stay there.
Yes, absolutely. And that's kind of where creativity comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
The more you kind of self-isolate away from like toxic people, negative energy, and you can get into your own mind space, it's like, oh my gosh, like I feel like so many doors, and I can speak for myself probably, and you too, with getting creative and starting your business, right? Where we take that moment alone and we're at that plateau, like you said, and what can I do while I'm here?
Mm-hmm.
And then your mind just starts, oh my gosh, unraveling all the
Yeah.
possibilities. That's how
And
I
like,
feel.
and like you said, you do have to get yourself away from, those toxic people. Because as soon as I started to like recover from that leadership role I was in, and I was with better people, then it's like, man, as soon as you're out of a context that you're burnt out or anything like that, then you can actually then your creativity comes back.
Yeah, it really does.
Yeah.
I wonder why.
I want it because you're not wasting brain power on other things.
Yeah, that too. But also your life is no longer being dictated for you as well. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
well, Ryan, it's been a pleasure. Is there anything else you want to share with our audience today?
I would just encourage everybody to remember that you're awesome and things are normal when you feel, that you maybe someone had treated you like you're the problem, but remember you're not the problem. Relationships are more important. You're not alone, and it's okay to not be okay, but just don't stay there.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your business venture and your family life and just being so vulnerable with all of us today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. I am glad to be here with you today.
Awesome. Okay, you guys, so that's all we have for you today. Remember, your journey to healing starts with understanding. Stay strong and stay informed. Every step towards awareness is a step towards freedom. Until next time, keep riding the waves of transformation with us. I'm your host, Tasha. Have the most wonderful day. Thanks, Ryan. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you.
You can find Ryan by visiting his website at xlcoaching.net and his Facebook and LinkedIn page at Ryan Crittenden. For more information about where to find me, please visit deepwavescoaching.com and on my Facebook and Instagram at Deep Waves Life Coaching.